I want to talk to you about crazy, bold faith. Crazy, bold faith. I believe that some of us are in battles. We're halfway through the battle and you've given up. It's like too hard. Just too crazy. I've won enough. Now I'm just going to quit. There are people, as I speak today, that are in the middle of a battle. You're right in the middle of it. The battle's getting hard, and some of you have put down your symbolic sword and shield and just saying, I guess I've gone far enough. It's done. It's over. I'm too tired. This is getting difficult. I'm just going to quit because I'm just exhausted. I had a guy last week come up to me after service, and he was kind of limping a little bit like this when he came up to me. He said, "Hey, Pastor, you remember me?" I said, "Yeah, I remember you." He said, "I did it." I said, "You did what?" He said, "I finished the Chicago Marathon." I said, "High five, bro." He said, No, you don't understand. I ran for a charity, so I was motivated to run for a charity. But he said, I got halfway through the marathon, my feet were wet, and they actually split open so that I had major sores on my feet. I could barely make it. He said it took me 2.5 hours to reach the first half of the marathon. And I was about to give up, but I remember there were some people around me that saying, "Don't give up, don't give up, don't give up." And he said, to finish the second half of the marathon, because I was limping, barely able to walk, he said it took me 4.5 hours to finish the next half, double the time. But he said, "You know what? I finished." And I want to say that there's some of you that feel like he did halfway through the marathon, like I've made it, but it's going slow now. It's going tough. This battle is not as easy as I thought it was going to be. And some of you have walked out on a God-given dream. Some of you have given up on something that God deposited in your heart to change the destiny of your family, to let God use you in some extraordinary ways, to actually break cycles and make legacies and not be what was handed down to you from your parents or grandparents, but you were going to start something new. And you got half into it. The battle got difficult. It's tough. And you kind of put down your sword. You put down your shield and you say, "God, I'm done. It's just going to be what it is." And if you're feeling like that, if that's you today, I want you to listen up, because I believe that this passage is for you. It's found in Joshua chapter 10. Joshua chapter 10. Some of you need to dare to believe for the strength to finish the dream that God has planted in your heart. And so I want to give you some principles that I think are important that I've gotten out of Joshua chapter 10 in finishing this battle. I'm going to begin reading in verse 1 of Josh chapter 10. It says this: "Now Adonai Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken the city of Ai and totally destroyed it, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and that the people of Gibeon had made a treaty of peace with Israel and had become their allies. So he and his people were very much alarmed at this, because Gibeon was an important city, like one of the royal cities." Let me pause for a second and just give you the context of this. Many of you know that Moses, the iconic, legendary man of God, prophet, was called of God and set the people of Israel, who had been in slavery for 400 years. He set them free from the oppression of the Egyptians by some supernatural things that God did, plagues. He led them out of Egypt, parted the Red Sea with his rod, received the 10 commandments from Mount Zion, led the people through the desert all the way up into the promised land, and then they choked. And so for 40 years, they had to wander around around the desert until they died off. And now he handed the leadership over to his protege named Joshua. Joshua was now leading about 2 million people, most scholars believe, into where Moses had been unable to lead them. Sometimes God has to raise up leaders to do what the previous generation was unable to do. And Joshua's leading the people of Israel. They consecrate themselves, cross the Jordan River, conquer Jericho. Then they have a mega defeat because there's sin in the camp. And now, I'm not going to get into chapter 9, but chapter 9 explains chapter 10. There was a people called the Gibeonites. And the Gibeonites heard how powerful Joshua and his army were. And so they conceived of a plan to trick Joshua. They tattered their clothes and acted like they had traveled a long way. And they showed up to Joshua and said, we've heard how powerful your army is. And we live very far away, but we'd like to make a treaty with you so that you will not fight with us or conquer us. And so Joshua, listen, because he didn't want to fight a battle, another battle, he made a treaty with them. We will not destroy you as we move forward. And then when they walked away, they said, ha ha, by the way, we're just neighbors. We're not a far away. We live right next to you. Can I tell you something about this? Listen, my first point, write this down. The battle you avoid fighting in the past will grow stronger on the back of procrastination. Because Joshua didn't want to fight the Gibeonites. Who wants to fight another battle? Because he did not want to fight the Gibeonites and made a treaty with the Gibeonites. Then the 5 other kings of the Amorites came together and attacked the Gibeonites, so they sucked Joshua into a bigger battle because he compromised in fighting the smaller battle. You say, well, Pastor, what's that have to do with me? Let me tell you what it has to do with you. Let me bring it home to you a little bit. How about it? Some of us make poor decisions and we postpone battles, little battles that you know you need to fight, and you just let it grow. You think you're avoiding it. You think you're going to fight it later, but really it's getting bigger and stronger as you go. And when you circle back to fight it again, now you're not fighting a little battle. Now you're fighting a mega battle. Oh, I know. You went to the doctor and he said, you have pre-diabetes. And in your mind, that means I don't have diabetes because I just have pre-diabetes. But really, he says to you, you know, you got to do something about this because you got pre-diabetes. And you say, but do I have diabetes? No, you don't have it, but you got pre-diabetes. You could have diabetes, but do I have diabetes? No. So you in your mind, you say, checked, I don't have it. But the doctor says, you know what? You got to change your eating. You got to do something about your health or you will develop diabetes. All you heard is, I don't have it. And so you think to yourself, you know, no way am I going to give up my champion breakfast at Dunkin' Donuts. Like that double chocolate cake donut with a Boston cream, 4 sugars in there. It's really like sugar with a little coffee that you put in it. You say, no, I can't give that up. It's too hard to change my diet. I can't give it up. I can't let go of that. And because you don't fight that little battle and change your diet a little bit and switch it around, next time 3 years later you go to the doctor and you say, I don't know what's happened with my toes. They're kind of tingling. I don't know. I'm feeling a little painful down here. What's happening? And now the doctor says you have full-blown diabetes and we may have to amputate your toe because I told you, you got to change your diet. And because you were unwilling to fight a little battle back there, that has suddenly grown to a mega battle. And now you're not just fighting pre-diabetes. Now you're battling for your leg. How many of you know what I'm talking about? It's when you postpone a little battle in the past, it starts to grow on the back of procrastination. Let me bring it spiritual to you. And Joshua made a compromise with the Gibeonites because he didn't want to fight the battle. And that cost him a bigger battle in the future. He should have fought a smaller battle so that it wouldn't grow into a huge battle. Some of you right now are postponing things that you know you should do. You know God has called you to do, but because it's hard to do, you keep saying later, later. I'm going to do it later, later. What you don't understand is that the enemy is growing stronger and stronger the more you put it off. Oh, I know you're a dad right now and you say, Pastor, I came to church, I've come to New Life, I've sensed the power of God, I want to follow Jesus with all my heart, I'm still getting rid of some of my old habits, I want to be a man of God, I want to lead my family, I have 3 kids that I'm raising, I want to turn my marriage around, but Pastor, my job is stressful. So when I get home, I just go in the garage and I roll one up and it relaxes me, Pastor. Now my kids don't know about it. My wife smells it on my clothes sometimes, keeps telling me, you got to let go of it. But you know what? It's a little thing. It's not a big thing. I'm going to let go of it, just not yet. I'm going to handle it, just not yet. And so there's a battle that God has called you to fight, something to let go of. Eliminate it from you. Stop smoking that pot. I know it relaxes you a little bit, but get rid of it. But you haven't fought that battle. And then you get some news at your job that maybe they'll get layoffs and there's some stress at your work. And so you find yourself smoking 2 or 3. Now you're doing it at night when people go to bed. And now you got to mix it in with a little bit more drinking and booze. And it was a little battle. You thought it was under control. And then suddenly before you know it, 3 years later, it's affecting your family and your kids. And we're sending you to rehab. Because there was a little battle you should have dealt with a long time ago. And you let that battle grow. So now it's become a major, major battle. I'm talking about when you procrastinate what you know you should do. You procrastinate obedience, a battle you need to fight now. You don't fight it now. It grows with time so it can sabotage you in the future. And Joshua now is fighting 5 kings, not just one. And by the way, can I remind you of this, by the way, that the reason that they weren't attacking Joshua, they were attacking the Gibeonites, but Joshua had made a treaty with the Gibeonites, and because he made a treaty with the Gibeonites, now he was sucked into their problems. How many of you have ever been sucked into someone else's problems? You get sucked into the vortex of someone else's crisis. You say, well, Pastor, I'm dating the guy. I didn't even like him that much. But he said, babe, I'm your girlfriend, I'm your boyfriend, babe. Hey, just $5,000. It'll get me out of debt. I just have some credit. So I loaned it to him. Hey, babe, if you can sign for me, look at me, babe. I'm going to look at my face. You could trust me, babe. Come on, it's me you're talking about. And now you're getting bankers that are calling you because you co-signed with some guy, and now you can't find the guy that said, look at me, babe, don't you trust me? And you've been sucked into his vortex of problems because listen to me, when you make alliances with people that you shouldn't make alliances with, when you make commitments with people that you shouldn't be making commitments with, I'm going to tell you something, you will get sucked into their crisis. Joshua was getting sucked into the crisis because he made a commitment to the Gibeonites, an arrangement with the Gibeonites, and now they're attacking the Gibeonites, and he is getting sucked into the vortex of their crisis. So remember that the battle you avoid fighting in the past will grow stronger on the back of procrastination. So I'm going to ask you this question. What battle are you supposed to be fighting now? What battle should you have fought a year ago that you've been postponing? What battle should you have fought 2 years ago, but you just keep putting it off later when time is better? What battle should you fight that's growing, that's going to become a mega problem because you haven't decided to fight it today? Secondly, I'm talking about how to finish the battles that we start. Not only the battles that you avoid grow stronger, but remember this: the word of the Lord often comes once we decide to march towards the battle that we know we're called to fight. Verse 6 says, the Gibeonites then sent word to Joshua in the camp of Gilgal, do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. The Gibeonites were about to be attacked by 5 armies that had come together to attack them. Help us, because all of the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us. Verse 7. So Joshua marched up from Gilgal with his entire army, including the best fighting men. And the Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you. So track with me here. I want you to notice that God did not speak to Joshua until he started marching down the road of obedience. That once Joshua started marching down the road that he knew he needed to fight, then the word of God came to him, not before. Can I remind you that sometimes we're waiting for God to give us a word, and God is saying, you don't need another word, you just need to obey what you already know, and then I'm going to give you a word? Oh, let me say that again. Some of us are waiting for a word, but God has already given us a word. You see, in Joshua chapter 1, God had told Joshua, Joshua, I'm giving you this land. In Joshua chapter 1, he said, Moses, your servant is dead. Get ready, cross the Jordan, lead your people into the land which I am ready to hand over to them. I am handing over to you every place that you set your foot, as I promised Moses. God had already told Joshua, I'm giving you this land, go take it. Obey me. But now Joshua is having some enemy territory occupy the land, and he doesn't stop to pray, God, should I go fight for this land? Because God had already told him, do it. I run into some believers that you want to pray for things that really is just a procrastination technique, because you don't need to pray, you just need to obey. Some of you are saying, well, you know, I've been dating this boy for 2 years. I know it's not quite healthy. He's kind of a believer because, well, how do you know he's a believer? Well, he has a cross, a crucifix he wears around his neck. Plus, one of his favorite earrings is the little cross earring he wears here. And I've seen a Bible in his house, you know. So he's sort of a believer, kind of a believer. You know, we're kind of struggling a little bit because, you know, I just started coming to church. I gave my life to Jesus. I want to follow God. But you know what? We really struggle because every weekend we used to go out, and then it's kind of normal that we have sex on the weekends together. During the week, we're okay, but during the weekend, we always have sex. I know it's not healthy. I know God says my body's the temple of the Holy Spirit, and I need to preserve myself and guard my sexuality. So you know what, Pastor, I'm going to pray about it. I need to pray, Lord, give me clarity. Hold on. What are you asking clarity about? Whether you should sleep with your boyfriend on the weekend? You don't need to fast and pray about it. You don't need to get counsel about it. You don't need to go to a mountaintop retreat and have God speak to you. God has already spoken clearly in his word. You just need to start obeying. You don't need to pray. God doesn't stutter. If he's spoken it, just say, this is what God, you need to march on the way to obedience. What you're really needing to say is, God, I know what I have to do, but it's hard. So as I start to obey you, give me the power and the strength to follow through. Joshua didn't pray whether he should march to battle. He started marching to battle, and while he was marching, God spoke to him. And God said, do not be afraid, Joshua, because listen, when we start to obey God in difficult circumstances, we start to fear. Am I doing the right thing? Can I follow through? Is this right? Fear is the culture of unbelief. Fear is saying to ourselves, can I really trust God? Can I really believe God? Fear is saying, if I draw a line, I may lose him. And am I ready to lose him? And in the back of your mind, like one girl years ago, I remember sitting down with one girl and she came to me and she said, I broke up with this guy. He was really bad. I'm a Christian now. And I said, great, why are you sad about it? She said, because I'm 21. And I said, yeah, I'm getting so old. I said, honey, you're 21. I know, but I don't want to end up alone. And in her mind, listen, in her mind, she'd already played the track down the road that she was going to end up alone. No one's going to be there, that she was going to be, while everybody was married and had a family, that she was not going to do that. In her mind, she had already played the card of loneliness, the card of no one's going to love me, the card of I need to compromise my conviction in order to hold on to that which I even know myself is unhealthy. That's what she had played in her mind. Listen, don't let the enemy entrap you with his lies. Joshua starts to march and God speaks to him while he is marching. Some of us, that's how it's going to work in our lives. As we start to obey, then God's going to speak to us and confirm his word. And God said to Joshua, do not be afraid. I've given them into your hand. No one of them will be able to withstand them. Number 3, so not only the battles that you avoid start to grow and sabotage you later. Number 2, remember that the word comes when we decide to obey. Don't wait for a word first. Obey if God has spoken. Number 3, God's power is manifest when we are weakest, so that all may know that the battle is the Lord's. Notice what it says in the following verse. It says, verse 9, after an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. After a what? All night. How many of you have ever pulled an all-nighter? When you were in college, you had to study all night because you were cramming for an exam, and you pulled an all-nighter. Hopefully without the help of Adderall and other substances, but you pulled an all-nighter. Some of you pull all-nighters now because you go out with your friends and you're all night, and the next day you're really tired. Some of you work a night shift and you've pulled an all-nighter, and you know that at the end of all-nighter, what is your body telling you? Sleep. I'm tired. Rest. There are some of you, by the way, there are people that come up to me and say, Pastor, if you ever see me nodding in service, it's because I just worked all night and I don't want to miss church, so I come straight from church and I sat in the pew. So, it's hard for me to stay awake. So, I believe their story. Maybe I'm naive, but I'm believing their story. But it's tough to stay awake when you're tired. It's tough to fight the battle when you feel weak. But can I tell you this? Write this down. Sometimes it's at our weakest point that God calls us to our biggest battles on purpose. Sometimes it's when you're the weakest, when you feel the most frail, when you're most tired, when you feel most insecure, when you feel like I can't do this anymore. I have no power within me to continue to fight this battle. Sometimes it's when you look at yourself and say, no way can I fight this battle, and you feel drained and tired and weak. Sometimes God will lead you into your biggest battles when you are at your weakest point. Why? Because when the battle is won, you can't point to yourself or your strength or your power or your endurance. You have to point your finger to the heaven and say, it's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. It's all God who did this. So Joshua has to travel from Gilgal to Gibeon. And I know you don't probably know this because that's all that it says in the Bible, but it was actually about an 8 to 10 hour walk. And not only was it a walk, it wasn't just walking like a long lakeshore drive. They had to cross and climb a mountain that was 3,300 feet high with their swords, with their shields, with their weapons. They marched 8 to 10 hours on a rugged terrain, treacherous terrain, a very high, get down to the bottom. They're tired, they're exhausted, they're sleepy, they're hungry. And when they're at their weakest point, God says, now enter into battle. Verse 10. Joshua says, let's attack them. At their weakest point, I'm sure the soldiers were looking at Joshua, are you crazy? I mean, we could barely hold up. How are we going to even fight this battle? I want you to notice how God intervenes in this battle. Verse 10, it says, and the Lord threw them into confusion before Israel. So Joshua and the Israelites defeated them completely at Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road going to Beth Horon and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. So what happened is God says, when you, even at your weakest point, decide to fight a battle that you know you should fight in Jesus' name, God is going to show up and do two things to help you win the battle. And I see this over and over in the Bible. Number one, he throws the enemy into confusion. It says, and the Lord threw them, the Amorites, he threw them into confusion. So when Joshua attacked them, the Amorites looked around, didn't know what was happening, and they're confused about it. They start slashing at each other. They start running. They're disorganized because God takes away clarity from the enemy. I have to be honest with you. I've been in some battles in my life before. I've had groups of people that were viciously wanting to attack. And I want to rise up in the flesh. I want to fight back. But you know what I've learned to pray? God, confuse them. I've said before, Lord, I don't have time to mess with that. Lord, would you enter into the camp and just confuse them? Would you make their tactics spin out? Would you make their strategies come to a halt? Would you cause there to be lack of clarity among them? Just confuse the enemy. And God does that. When you're in a battle, I see it in the Old Testament over and over. It says, and God brought confusion to the enemy camp. And God brought confusion. And when you're confused, you don't fight well. Listen to me. Sometimes what you need to just say is, God, bring confusion to the enemy. I'm tired, Lord. I can't fight this battle very well, but I pray that you bring confusion to the enemy camp. I believe that sometimes we bring confusion to the enemy camp when we don't respond the way the enemy expects us to respond. The enemy expects you to cuss when you're cussed at. But you bring confusion to the enemy camp when you respond with a kind word. The enemy expects you to be resentful because of things that have been said and done, but when you respond with love, hate doesn't know what to do with love, and it brings confusion to the enemy camp. The enemy expects you to give up when you're down and discouraged, but when you stand up and say, you know what, I'm going to keep going, it brings confusion to the enemy camp. Listen, when you have been so beat up by life and circumstances that it feels like the faith has been beat out of you, and yet you get up on a Sunday morning and you drag yourself barely and sit in a chair, and when the worship starts, you raise your voice and you offer a sacrifice of praise when you could be saying, forget this, but you raise a sacrifice of praise, and with a hoarse voice, you say, Lord, I praise you and bless you, even though circumstances aren't going very good right now. Listen, You send the enemy into confusion. Because the enemy expects you to respond in the flesh. When you respond in the spirit, he doesn't know what to do with a believer that responds in the power of the Spirit. By the way, that tells us in Ephesians chapter 6 that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and rulers of the darkness of this age. You realize that your battle is not against people, but sometimes it's what's around people, within people, driving people. And that person that blew up in anger and spewed out venom at you, hurtful, deeply poisonous, toxic venom at you in that conversation, and you're taking it all personal, you may need to ask yourself, yeah, but what's behind it? Why are they gripped with so much anger? What is behind? What is at rage in their soul? What's the enemy doing inside of them? So I'm not going to take it personal. I'm going to pray for them that the enemy will lose a grip on their soul, because they spew venom at me and at them. So I'm not going to take it personal. I'm going to pray for the battle that really we're fighting, which is a spiritual battle as well. The other thing that I see in this passage is not only does God step in and bring confusion to the enemy camp, but the other thing that God does is, listen, it says, and the Lord hurled large hailstones, not hailstones, but hailstones, down on them, and more of them died because of the hail than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. I was going out of a grocery store yesterday, and the lady told me, it's snowing out there. I thought, how could it be snowing? I came in, it was pretty nice. And when I walked out, were you in that? When I walked out, man, little pieces of hail were hitting, man, it was coming down. The carts were blowing across, the shopping carts were blowing across the parking lot. I mean, there was a wind that was hitting there. The Bible says that God decided to help Joshua in the battle. And as Joshua and his exhausted army are chasing after the Amorites, God says, you know what, I'm going to help you out a little bit. And God opened up the heavens and started sending hail down, and it started hitting the enemy. And more people were killed because of the hail than because of the sword. I just want you to know that God fights our battles for us. And sometimes God does in the supernatural what you could never do in the natural, because God says they need a little help. There's one. There's another one. I just want you to know that sometimes God wants you, to pull out your sword and to keep in the battle. But God's saying, I know you're fighting. I know you're fighting in court for an unjust battle against you, in custody for your children. I know you're wrestling it and you're full of fear that your kids may be taken away from it for you, and there's lies being hurled at you. And God is simply saying, listen, I want you to pray that God would bring about confusion in the enemy camp. But remember, I'm going to fight a battle for you that you can't even fight on your own. I'm going to do things for you that you couldn't do, things in the supernatural that cannot be done in the natural. Because if God is for you, who can be against you? I will fight your battle. I've seen God work so many times in ways like this. So not only do we need to battle the small battles to avoid the growing battle, we need to remember that the word of the Lord comes when obedience is enacted upon. We need to remember that God's power is manifest when we're weakest, and He'll fight for us. And then lastly, write this down, number 4. Finishing the battle often requires crazy, bold faith that God delights in honoring. Crazy, bold faith. CBF. Crazy, bold faith. I want you to see what happens. Verse 12. on the day that the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, I want you to see what's happening. They're fighting the Amorites. They're tired, they're exhausted, they're chasing them. The sun is starting to go down. And Joshua says, I want to finish what I started. I don't want to circle back and try to fight this battle again. How many of you have felt that way before? Man, I want to finish this battle. I don't want to keep going back to this over and over. I want to finish what I started. The sun is up and Joshua realizes it's going to take us a lot longer to finish this battle. We're running out of time. And if it gets nighttime, we're going to have to call off this battle. And in the morning, we're going to have to try to find people, and they're already scattered. So probably later on, I'm going to have to fight this battle again, and it's not going to be finished. God, I want to finish the battle that I started. I don't want it to continue on. I don't want it to go on and on and on. I don't want a sequence to this battle, God. I want to finish the battle we started. So this is what Joshua says. Look at what he says in verse 12. So Joshua, in front of all the Israelites, everybody's battling, they're running with the swords, they're exhausted, they're tired, and something comes upon Joshua, a moment of crazy, bold faith. He looks at the sun, and with a loud voice, he says, sun, stand still. Like, are you crazy, Joshua? And it really has gotten to you, right? Exhaustion, delirium. What were you hollering at the sun to stand still? Oh no, this wasn't delirium. This was crazy, bold faith. And Joshua saying, I will finish what God started. God, if you are for me, help me finish this battle. And Joshua says, sun, stand still over Gibeon. And you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon. Verse 13, so the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the nation avenged itself on the enemies. As it's written in the book of Jasher, the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it before or since. The day when the Lord listened to a human being, surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. You say, hold on a second, Pastor. The sun stood still? Like, are you trying to tell me that he yelled to the sun and it stopped and it stayed? I'm talking about the God of the universe who created heavens and earth. I'm talking about a sovereign God who said, let there be light, and there was light. I'm talking about the God who put the moon in the sky and the stars in the universe, the God who created the galaxies, the God who engineered your eyesight, the God who created your body system so that your nervous system and your blood system and your brain are all connected. I'm talking about the God that was and is and will always be, the God that has never had a beginning, will never have an end, the God that is sovereign, the God that is omnipotent, omniscient, sovereign over the universe, that's never learned anything because he's always known everything, that's never had anything that he can't do because he has all power. I'm talking about that God. So it never should surprise you that God can do the miraculous. It never should surprise you that God can bend the laws of nature according to his will. But just in case, by the way, for those of you that are a little bit skeptic, let me say this. That in the writings of the ancient, there is a preponderance of evidence that says that many ancient civilizations point to a day that turned into 2 days of light. Scan through the Chinese writings, and there's a legend that long time ago, there's a day that turned into 2. The Incas of Peru talk about a 48-hour day that extended into 2. The Aztecs of Mexico have that same kind of record. The Babylonians and the Persians from Iran actually have a legend that something miraculously happened and that there was a day that the sun did not go down that extended for 48 hours. Herodotus, the ancient historian, recounts that while Egypt's priests were showing their temple in the records, that he read that there was a day that was twice its length. In other words, the ancient civilizations point to this weird, unusual, crazy, unexplainable event in which a 24-hour period turned into a 48-hour period of light. Interesting. Little did they know, little could they conceive that the whole reason behind the, now how did it happen? I don't know. Maybe God tilted the earth. Maybe he slowed down the rotation of the earth. Maybe there was a reflection in the sun. Maybe it was his own glory. I don't know how God did it. I just know that God did it. So what surprises me, not that God can do it, what surprises me is why he did it. Why would God do something so cataclysmic, so powerful? Because a man full of crazy bold faith says, I want to finish the battle that I started, God. I don't want to circle back. Let me finish the battle that I procrastinated on, that I've been sucked into. Let me finish the battle. God, you called me to this battle. Now let me finish it until it's totally, absolutely complete. I want to finish, God, what I started in your name. Now here's what I want to say. Joshua said to them, do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Be strong and courageous. This is what the Lord will do to you and all your enemies you are going to fight. I've had some moments. I'm in a long, lengthy battle. And I just want to say, okay, I think it's good enough, God. It's not what I thought it was. It's not fully completed, but we've had a victory. But in my heart, I know it's not fully completed, the victory. I have a choice to make. I can either give up and say it's good enough, or I can say, no, that's not what I've been believing for. I'm going to have some crazy, bold faith to finish what God started all the way to the end. Oh yeah, maybe you've been in a battle for your marriage and you went all the way to divorce court and you backed away from it. And you say, well, at least we didn't get a divorce, but you know what? You're still married. You could barely talk to each other. It's still sort of toxic and broken and dysfunctional. Is that what you prayed for? Is that the end of the battle? Was it just not about getting a divorce, or did you believe something better for your marriage? Did you believe that you guys would love each other and know each other, communicate, that your love would spring into something powerful that would affect your children? Is that what you prayed for? So just because you're out of divorce court, it doesn't mean that it's over. You need to have some crazy, bold faith that says, God, this is not the whole thing I prayed for. And so I'm going to jump in and pray until it's all done, God. I'm not done with this battle. Hey, I'm glad you're not strung out on heroin. And you're doing better. But did you pray that you would just do better? Or did you pray that you would be completely free? Walking in full freedom. Being able to help others come to freedom. Just because you're not as bad as you were, don't stop the battle. Jump in and say, God, I'm going to finish what you started until there's complete freedom. Have some crazy, bold faith that says, sun, stand still. Whatever you have to do, God, until it's completely finished in Jesus' name. Hey, man of God, you came from a broken, crazy family. where you never heard your father once say he loved you, where you were maybe abused and walked out on, where there was no real sense of unity in your household, and you prayed that God would turn it around, that you would be a cycle breaker, legacy maker. And you're still at the household, but your household doesn't reflect the peace of God. It's still not the godliness that you want. I mean, it's still halfway chaotic. You're still there. It's not as bad as your parents. But is this what you prayed for? Is it okay with you? Or is God saying, I want to finish what I started. Pick up your sword, grab your shield, and fight for the destiny that I put inside of your mind, that dream that this family would be different, and jump up and say, it's not over, God. I'm going to fight until I see my kids loving you, following you, until we're worshiping together, until the world knows that there is a God that reigns in this household. I'm just wondering today, if you're halfway through a battle, and if God is trying to call some of you to have some crazy, bold faith to finish the battle, because faithful is He to complete what He started in you. Hey, I'm glad you're not having panic attacks every day now. I'm glad you can walk out of the house like you couldn't walk before. I don't want you just to survive. I want you to get to the point where you're not only occasionally suffering from anxiety, but so full of faith and the goodness of God that you're helping others overcome their anxiety. All the way, I want you to finish the battle that God started.